If anything, this strengthened Alexandre de Moraes greatly. It strengthened the regime of censorship that he's been overseeing. Because Elon Musk thought he had all the leverage, meaning you're not going to let all of Brazilians lose X, and yet that's exactly what Brazil did. We have covered over the past 6 weeks the rather significant and unprecedentedly intense conflict between the government of Brazil on the one hand and Elon Musk's X social media platform, previously called Twitter, on the other, which actually culminated in Brazil taking the extraordinary step. When I say Brazil, I mean one judge on the Supreme Court. He ultimately got 4 other judges to vote with him for it, but it was really at his impetus, who simply issued an order banning X from existing in Brazil, ordering every telecommunications company in Brazil to immediately cut off X at the IP level. And at the same time he did that, he invented a law out of nowhere that made it a crime to use VPNs. VPNs, as we've explained before, are programs that allow you to hide the origins of your internet connection. It's often used in authoritarian countries like China or Russia or Iran or now Brazil, to get around government blocks of certain sites that you actually want to access. And he said that anyone using VPNs to access this banned platform called Twitter will receive a fine of $9,000 a day. $9,000 in the Brazilian currency, reais, is actually higher than, in one day, the fine, than the average medium annual salary for Brazilians, just to give you an extent of how extreme that punishment was. And over the last 5 weeks, X really has been unavailable in Brazil. Now I've heard, I'm not sure, can't confirm it, I've heard that there are people who have been in Brazil still accessing X, presumably by using the VPNs that court banned. There were a lot of them, in fact. There seemed like there was a lot of civil disobedience, but for many people, most media outlets and the like, observed the ban and haven't been on Twitter since August 30th, which is the five weeks ago when X began to be banned in Brazil. Now, when that happened, it was in the context of Elon Musk viciously denouncing this judge as a dictator. He said he's going to have his day coming soon when he'll be in prison, maybe thinking about the role Elon Musk would play if a Trump victory were to happen in a month, and the role that he would play in the administration. But it got extremely vitriolic. And one of the things that Elon Musk said is that these censorship orders are so illegal and so unjust and so unconstitutional, all of which I believe is to be true as well, having lived in this country for quite a long time in Brazil, having understanding quite well its constitution and its legal processes, that he just couldn't in good conscience continue to censor huge numbers of people with no explanation provided, including members of Congress the Brazilian people voted for in large numbers to represent them in Brasilia, in the country's capital. And it was a very important stance. Elon Musk repeatedly affirmed it and defended it. It created a massive and important debate in Brazil around free speech and censorship and the limits online, but also in a lot of other countries. And Elon Musk and X stood their ground for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, even after they lost access to Brazil. And just to indicate what a huge market Brazil is, as I've said before, Brazil is the 6th largest, most populous country on the planet. Only 5 countries on the planet have more people, greater populations, than X. And it's not only a large country, it's a very online country. It's a very young population. Brazilians are very, very active on social media. And so it's an extremely important market for X to be in, especially after all the advertisers they've lost in the United States through all the attempts to drive advertisers away. And X is not doing well financially. Elon Musk bought X for $44 billion, but he didn't just write a check from his own bank account. He used major banks and other financial institutions to give him the credit to be able to buy X for $44 billion. And by all accounts, the value of X is now sharply reduced. Certainly 50%, maybe even less, probably less, in part because of his commendable insistence on free speech, which has driven away a lot of corporate advertisers and even a lot of users. So to lose Brazil, one of the most important markets financially for X, is a major blow. And then on top of that, one of the things that the Supreme Court did was X decided that it was going to remove all of its physical presence from Brazil, because the Supreme Court actually started to say if X doesn't censor who we want, we're going to arrest the executives and officials who work for X in Brazil, and including its lawyers. In order to protect those people, Elon fired the people who were in Brazil or relocated them and completely removed all of X's assets and properties from Brazil. And yet at the time, because of what this court and this judge perceived as X's defiance of their law, he started imposing millions and millions of dollars on X. But because there was no bank account for X for him to seize, because Elon had pulled out all of its assets, he started to freeze the bank accounts of Starlink. Starlink is a company inside SpaceX, a completely different company. Elon is the major shareholder in both, but they each have much different shareholders. They're incorporated differently. They're totally different companies. And he started freezing the bank accounts of SpaceX, of Starlink. Starlink, in fact, provides a lot of free services to the people of Brazil. Free internet services to people in the Amazon and other places that couldn't access it. Poor kids who rely on his free service. He's been awarded and given all sorts of homages, Elon Musk has, for philanthropically allowing Starlink to reach people for free in Brazil that otherwise would have no internet access. And yet this judge got so fanatical and unhinged that, based on zero legal basis, including people who defend him typically admitted that, he started taking the assets, millions of dollars, out of the bank account of Starlink and putting it into the Brazilian coffers. And you can imagine the kind of pressure that Elon Musk was under, not only from the institutional investors who allowed him to buy X for $44 billion and who now have a stake in a company infinitely less than that, and losing access to Brazil would be a massive blow even further to that, but also to his investors in SpaceX who are saying, we're not willing to risk our assets and have our bank account seized in order to pay for this political cause that you have with a completely different company that we never invested in. And I'm not defending Elon, I'm just explaining why it is that starting around 2.5 weeks ago, X started signaling very clearly, not just signaling, but stating that they want to get back into Brazil and that they are willing to comply with all of the requirements to get back into Brazil that they previously refused to comply with. They started censoring every account that this judge had previously ordered banned, including of elected officials. They appointed a representative of X who would be physically present in Brazil the way that it was required. And he said he would pay all the fines out of X's own assets. And over the last 2 weeks, X has been gradually leaping through every hoop that was set up for them in order to get back into Brazil by this judge, completely retreating on every single stand they took. And last week, they were done. They were completed. They had completed every task, and there was an expectation that X would be back in Brazil by last week. The problem was, over the weekend, this last Sunday, there was a huge election, kind of like the midterm election in the United States. The presidential election in Brazil is 2020 and 2022 and 2026. So 2024 is like a midterm election where they elect mayors and all of the city council members, basically municipal elections all over Brazil. It's a very important one to test who's going to have influence in all of these cities. And so my guess is that the Supreme Court wasn't that eager to have X back and usable before the election. And so at the very last minute, even though X had jumped through every hoop, this judge said, oh, you paid the fines, but you paid the fines to the wrong account inside our court. It wasn't supposed to be this account inside our court. It was supposed to be this one. And until you get that money out of this account and put it in the right account, we're not going to let you back. So it took a few days. The election was over. And by the way, the Brazilian right did quite well in that election, definitely better than the Brazilian left did. And now X is back on the air as of today. And I just want to make clear that even though a lot of people who support Elon Musk and what he did, and I'm one of them, a lot of them started to try and pretend that this was some sort of victory of free speech, that Elon stood his ground and Brazil backed down. It's actually the exact opposite. And you can even see that in the announcement that X's government affairs, global government affairs account posted today explaining what happened. They said, quote, X is proud to return to Brazil. Given tens of millions of Brazilians, access to our indispensable platform was paramount throughout the entire process. here's the key phrase. They say, we will continue to defend free speech within the boundaries of the law, meaning every time a judge orders an account censored, X is promising that from now on in the future, it will do what in the past it refused, which was immediately comply with these censorship orders. What made X different is its refusal to comply with those censorship orders the way Facebook and Google and every other major media platform other than Rumble refuses to do. And yet they're still saying we needed to give Brazilians access to our indispensable platform. Now, X is indispensable in the sense that it's the place where most journalism and politics and activism takes place. It's still not used by a majority of Brazilians or a majority of Americans, but for political activism, for journalism, for debate over political issues, it definitely is the kind of epicenter of the discussion. But if X is promising in the future, like it just ended up doing, to reverse itself and say we're always going to comply with every judicial order to censor, the promise that they will continue to defend free speech rings a little hollow. Now, what may still make X different and better is that Facebook and Google often just censor on their own without even being told to. Whereas X probably will continue to lean on the side of free speech and only do so when the courts order it to do so. But for sure, that is a retreat in terms of what it is that Elon Musk had said he wouldn't do, which is comply with these orders, which is why he was banned in Brazil, and he had to reverse himself to get back into Brazil. Here from the AP today, giving a little bit of sense of how this is being reported, quote, Elon Musk's X is back in Brazil after its suspension, having complied with all judicial demands. That was the requirement. I don't know how I put that black line there, but here, having complied with all judicial demands. So that is basically what happened, is that X backed down. Here's the text, quote, internet service providers began restoring access to the platform after Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes authorized lifting X's suspension on Tuesday. De Moraes ordered the shutdown of X on August 30th after a month-long dispute with Musk over free speech, far-right accounts, and misinformation. Musk had disparaged de Moraes, calling him an authoritarian and a censor, although his rulings, including X's nationwide suspension, were repeatedly upheld by his peers. Musk's company ultimately complied with all of de Moraes' demands. Let me say that again. Musk's company, I don't know why I'm being so uncoordinated with these pens today, but Musk's company, the format is actually a little bit different, so I'm going to share some of that blame. I'm not going to take it all, but I'll take some. Musk's company ultimately complied with all of de Moraes' demands. So that was why X is back in Brazil, not because X stood its ground, but because it didn't. Those demands included blocking certain accounts from the platform, paying outstanding fines, and naming a legal representative. Failure to do the latter had triggered the suspension. Now, there were some pretty large pro-Musk accounts that characterized what happened here, maybe well-intentioned, but in a way that most definitely is not accurate. The account lives of TikTok, upon learning that X is back in Brazil, said, quote, today, huge win for free speech. When she saw a free speech victory for Elon Musk, Brazil has lifted its ban on X. And that account also characterized it as a free speech victory for Elon Musk. Here's another supporter of Elon Musk, Elon Miles Chong, who said Brazil has just lifted the ban on X. Progress. There's no conceivable way in which this is progress. If anything, this strengthened Alexandre de Moraes greatly. It strengthened the regime of censorship that he's been overseeing. Because Elon Musk thought he had all the leverage, meaning you're not going to let all of Brazilians lose X, and yet that's exactly what Brazil did. And they continued to do it for 5 weeks after the election, and there was not enough public pressure to force them to reverse, and so who reversed himself was Elon Musk. Again, I say that he did so with viable reasons, but if you're going to make that kind of a public stand, I'd rather lose profit then capitulate to unjust orders of censorship, either follow through with that or don't make those claims in the first place. Because what this did is strengthen Alexandre de Moraes. Every headline in Brazil, every headline elsewhere is Musk and X are humiliated, being forced to do everything they vowed they would never do. Now, as we always say, the reason we talk about Brazil or wherever this is happening in the UK or Canada or the EU is because it's starting to happen everywhere. A big catalyst for what happened in Brazil was that 3 days before Brazil ordered X banned, France had arrested the founder, the multi-billionaire Russian founder of Telegram, Pavel Durov, who had always vowed to refuse government orders to censor or turn over data. They arrested him by luring him into Paris. They charged him with multiple felonies. And then 2 weeks later, Pavel issued a public statement saying that Telegram was radically changing all of its rules so that in the future they would significantly fortify their content moderation and comply with all government orders. When a state hangs over you the threat of imprisonment, by design, you're going to start changing your policies, the same as if a government threatens to block your platform from appearing in the US. And this is exactly what is now happening in other countries. From Reuters today, quote, Turkey blocks the instant messaging platform Discord. Turkey's Information Technologies and Communications Authority published the access ban decision on its website. Transport and Infrastructure Minister Abdulkadir Erologlu said the matter of the Discord platform made it difficult for authorities to monitor and intervene when illegal or criminal content is shared. Quote, security personnel cannot go through the content. We can only intervene when users complain to us about content shared, he told reporters in Parliament. Since Discord refuses to share its own information, including IP addresses and content, with our security units, we were forced to block access. It wasn't just Turkey that did that, it was also Russia. From the Washington Post today, Russia bans Discord chat program to the chagrin of military users. Quote, Russia has moved to ban Discord, a popular platform for real-time communication, drawing ire from the Russian military that has extensively used the app to coordinate units on the battlefield in Ukraine. Last month, a Moscow court fined the American company for, quote, failing to delete prohibited information. They later said it asked Discord to remove nearly 1,000 pages and channels, including child pornography and extremist statements, but some content was still available. Aside from targeting harmful content, the company has also used the term, quote, prohibited information to pressure Western IT giants to comply with the company's censorship laws passed shortly after Russia launched its war in Ukraine. Under Russian laws, criticizing the war, military or government officials, supporting gay rights, or sharing content authorized by opposition forces can be punished by law and viewed as, quote, calls for extremism. Not only in Russia, not only in Turkey, not only in Brazil, but also in Ukraine, that bastion of democracy for which we're fighting because we love democracy so much and want to make sure it's preserved, even though its leader that won't face an election indefinitely until this war is over, that democracy. From the Ukrainian Pravda, they also announced, quote, Ukrainian parliament to restrict Telegram usage based on very similar rationale. So I hope what you're seeing here is this very visible, rapidly worsening, and very dangerous trend where governments are tired of pressuring social media companies to censor. They're now using force to do so. I think the arrest of Pavel Durov in France was the biggest escalation yet, but it signaled to all these other countries, it signaled to Brazil, if France did it, you can do it. And now you see every one of these other countries banning social media companies until and unless they capitulate and promise to obey the state's orders about the kind of content that can and cannot be permitted on the platform. If you believe a free internet and the ability to use the internet to speak freely is a high value, there are few things more dangerous than this trend.